Well, welcome back to the hot seat today. I'm talking with Nichole Farrow. Good morning, Nichole.
Morning. Thank you for being here.
So you're a relatively new member of PCD. For those members who've not come across you in our event so far, why don't you explain a little bit about your business and the services you offer to clients?
Yeah, so I work with high net worth individuals who are going through divorce. Different to a lot of other divorces, I actually work with both sides. Um, Both parties will work with me in the sense of the fact that they have a co-parenting relationship to maintain after the divorce is through. So all the clients that I work with have children, and therefore it's not a case of we get divorced and we never have to see one another again. Actually, we have to spend the rest of our lives communicating with one another in some shape or form, and therefore the need to have a healthy relationship after that, one for yourselves and your children, is paramount. And I really support clients through that process. So either at the very beginning, so they know they've realized they want to get a divorce and they want to try and be as amicable as possible, but more often than not, halfway through things haven't gone quite so well, and I'm often instructed by the solicitors to sort of come in and help with that communication because it is starting to break down, or at the end when actually the divorce has been finalised and it has been a particularly difficult divorce, and what's left is a very difficult relationship where a lot of communications happened actually through the solicitors, and now they're kind of left with how are we going to manage this going forwards. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that introduction. Obviously, COVID has put incredible stress on people's relationships. There's been well reported the number of breakups that have happened through COVID and are projected to happen going forward. I mean, perhaps give us a sense of the work that you've done through COVID and what you see as the long-term impacts of divorce on children. Would be great to hear your thoughts from that.
Yeah, as you can imagine, COVID has definitely put a lot of strain on relationships. I think it's fair to say that I don't think COVID is the result, divorce is the result of COVID alone. I think generally, if there's issues within a relationship, COVID has heightened those, because there's no distractions from dealing with the issue. And also, I think a lot of people have done a lot of reflecting during COVID and said, actually, this is where I want my life to take me, and that at times has been different to what perhaps the other person had in mind, and therefore there's a natural we've drifted apart. So COVID has definitely heightened any existing issues that were already there and put a lot of strain on relationships. There are some who are choosing to divorce even as COVID is going on, and courts are open for business, although there is a massive backlog, unfortunately. But there is also those who are sort of staying where they are until lockdown is lifted. And so there is an expectation, as we've seen in other countries like Italy and Turkey, where when lockdown ends, there will be another spike in the divorce rates. I mean, the divorce rate went up 18.4% last year, which is a massive increase on the previous 2 years anyway. And that's with the court systems being under pressure. So yeah, it is expected to rise further. The impact long term of divorce on children, I mean, that's always the concern, isn't it? And I hear it time and time again of we're staying together for the children. But I can honestly say that actually the damage that's done to children in an unhappy marriage is far worse than what's done in an amicable divorce. And it is possible to come out stronger and better, and your children to be in that position as well, as a result of doing a divorce in the right way. And there is such a thing as the right way, as opposed to sort of drawing battle lines and putting your children in the middle, which unfortunately we do see a lot of. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that there's actually a kind of a cultural stigma attached to divorce. It's still seen as quite a shameful thing to do. It's almost a failure that you didn't make it work. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on people. And then, you're in survival mode, and that brings out everybody's worst. And, there is this sort of fear that you'll be rejected by your friends or your family, or, in society, you've got to kind of tick that box that says, I'm a divorcee, I'm not single, I'm a divorcee. And, there is that sort of label and stereotype that goes with it that's, I think, really challenging for people. But as I said, the impacts long term of kind of having that mentality and that mindset really has a knock-on effect to the children, because we are products of our environment, and actually quite often you'll see that children who come from divorced families will actually have issues in their own relationships or even go on to divorce as adults. So it's really important at any stage that you know, really take care of yourself and divorce in the best way possible for you and your children.
Have you seen the benefit to clients you've worked with of using a coach through this incredibly stressful time, from a mental and financial perspective? You know, there might be a gut reflex. People think, oh, I need to lawyer up and really sort of have a battle with my former my spouse or partner. I mean, what's your take on how coaches can add value into this fraught relationship?
Yeah, I mean, hugely. I think the natural conclusion, as I said, because if you actually look in the media of divorce, there's no good divorce stories. It's all, there's a battle, and we can all, you know, reel off the high court cases that, you know, we've seen played out in the press. And, you know, even if you look at media and, you know, The Split or War of the Roses, The Marriage Story, they're all this horrible battle between two people. And people naturally assume if I'm getting divorced, I've got to protect myself. They're going to come after me for everything I've got. And I've got to, as you say, lawyer up. But actually, there's so many alternatives to getting divorced, to the point where you can even do a collaborative divorce process where you do actually both have a lawyer, but the lawyers work together. So you should be able to walk into that room and not know which lawyer is representing who. And everything's done in a really collaborative process. And they sign up to the fact that they will not go to court. If it ends up in court, you can't take either lawyer with you because you've signed up to the fact that you're going to avoid that. Obviously, there's mediation and, as you say, coaching as well. And actually, if you could, the court costs for a divorce gone wrong and the battle and the, you know, negotiating and corresponding between solicitors as opposed to being able to speak directly, that has a huge financial cost, as well as you say, a mental and emotional cost, because when those solicitors step away, how are you going to actually speak to your now ex-spouse about, you know, who's picking the kids up on Friday? If you can't have that conversation without feeling really triggered by an email, that, you know, has a huge knock-on effect to you, to your children. And as I said, financially, it's huge. The cost of investing in a coach and having that kind of communication up front saves dividends in, you know, in the long run.
I mean, I imagine like things like Christmas or summer holidays are big trigger points. Is that what you find? I mean, these are like emotional times, aren't they, when people think about family and, you know, it's obvious when one partner has and hasn't the access that they want. I mean, how do you find negotiating around those kind of times of year?
Yeah, and as you say, those are difficult times, and not just the holidays. I mean, to be fair, the holidays actually tend to trigger divorce as well. The divorce rate always, the inquiries always go up after Christmas or after the summer holidays when people have spent long time together. So, and you're right, those kind of pressured family, we must all be together kind of environments, that's what's expected. If you're not meeting that, then you feel that you're missing out, you're losing out, and you have this sort of emotional internal struggle that can play out quite badly with your ex and with, you know, in front of your children. So yeah, it is absolutely about trying to negotiate that and negate that. And that's I think the beauty of working with both sides. So in the work that I do, they have coaching sessions together in which it is around that kind of communication and building those kind of that foundation of that relationship. But they also have one-to-one sessions with me, both of them individually. And that's where we take all the heat and the emotional baggage and the, you know, the triggers and everything else that's going on. We take that to those sessions. So it's not that you're playing out in front of your ex-spouse. You're actually dealing with that one-to-one with me and having the resilience and the mindset to then come to those joint sessions in a much better headspace that's really collaborative and forward focused and future focused. And that's where working with both sides actually is really beneficial. But it's not just the Christmas periods and holidays and things. What I've seen is actually it's the bigger events that come later on down the line that if you don't get this right at the beginning, has a huge knock-on effect later. I was actually instructed to work with a couple the year before last by the daughter who was getting married at the age of 30. Her parents still couldn't be in the same room as one another.
Wow.
And she said to me, the divorce happened 17 years ago, But would you work with them now? Because I'm dreading my wedding day. My mum and dad are dreading my wedding day because they don't want to be in each other's company. And actually, I'm the first of three. So this is going to happen again, 2 more times. And we've got grandchildren and other events that are going to come up. And, it's about time they both let go and move on so we can still be a family, because that's the thing that I think people miss. You are still a family. You're a completely different shape, but you're still a family together. And at some point, there may be other people you're looking to bring into that family. And if you don't have the foundations right, it's going to undermine any future relationships as well.
I mean, how can we address this sort of negative narrative? People burying these things and coming with this confrontational approach rather than something more positive. I mean, I remember from Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin's divorce and conscious uncoupling and being derided a bit, I think, from the general public, whereas really that could be regarded as more of a healthy approach to actually new phase of life. I mean, how do we flip the narrative away from courtroom battles, having my day in court, to something more pragmatic and more as you say long term? What do you think? Is it about education of the general population, that it doesn't have to be this way?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that is a brilliant example of actually a divorce done well, that, as you said, has been mocked throughout the years since. And actually, they're a success, aren't they? They actually managed to, I think, even go on holiday together and are good friends. I mean, I'm not suggesting that everybody necessarily gets to that stage, but, that's so much better than the alternative. And there isn't enough of those stories coming through. And they do exist and they are out there. I think the media has a big part to play in this. As I said, I think that there is a big change that needs to happen in that narrative. There is some great work that's being done amongst solicitors. So solicitors who have signed up to that collaborative process, because it's not every solicitor wants to work in that way. But for those that do, they're really, trying to steer people in that direction. Resolution, which is a family law membership that a lot of solicitors and coaches like myself have signed up to, are looking to really change the stigma around divorce and make information available and try and relieve courts as well, because it's getting to the point now where courts are so busy and it's becoming so difficult to get into court that people are actually taking it upon themselves to try and divorce, and that's never a good state to be in. There is work that's happening in pockets. There's also things like the divorce surgery who are doing one lawyer to one couple and trying to again sort of have that arrangement without going to court. So there is definitely work that's happening, but it's in pockets, and I think it needs to be much more readily available and shouted about, really, and people just need to be more aware of it, because, as I said, it's not just a case of court's your only option, and I think it is an education piece. Interestingly as well, actually, Baroness Shackleton has got some work that she's doing down at Exeter University, where she's trying to speak to young people about the decisions they make going into marriage, because as she says, sort of 70% of her clients say, I knew at the very beginning this was not going to work out, but they kind of felt, oh, well, I don't want to call the wedding off, or I've done it now, and they kind of stick at it for a while, and then it doesn't work. So there's actually an education piece at the very beginning of going into a marriage as well. And I'm a big advocate of marriage. I'm also a big advocate of, if it doesn't work out, kind of owning that and then stepping away in the right way.
So it's talking to younger people as they have more serious relationships in their early 20s. They feel that it's not inevitable that they're on a path to get married, and if things aren't working, then they should address these issues rather than feeling duty bound to proceed and then create these issues down the line.
Exactly. And remembering that point of we are products of our environment. We very often end up repeating the mistakes of our parents because psychologically we live from our past experiences, and if we're not careful, we just recreate them in the future. And it's it's having that support and doing that mindset work that enables you to interrupt that pattern of behavior, because it is just a pattern of behavior. It's just a habit that's buried in your subconscious, which sadly, unfortunately, controls 95% of our thoughts. So unless you actually spend some time there and deal with that stuff, you're not going to do it with the 5%. So you need to work with the 95% and actually make that change. And I think working with younger people and interrupting that at the start is really key as well.
And in your work, you would work with both sides, both parties of the marriage. Some coaches might take the approach of working with one or the other. I mean, what do you think what's the added value in the approach of having both around the table?
So I only work with those who have children. So I think if you don't have children together, then in all honesty, there probably isn't an advantage to working with your ex-spouse to move on from the marriage, because you might as well work one-to-one with your coach, because it is very much about you personally, your journey, and what you're going to go on to do next. However, if you do have children, then there is an element of working on yourself and progress and being very self-aware and not recreating the same mistakes that you've done in your marriage, and looking out for yourself and your children. But unless you can get the other person to do the same, then that co-parenting relationship is still going to be quite tricky, and there's only so much change you can implement. But if you can work together with your ex-spouse, then both of you kind of own your own emotional sort of part in this, and the healing that you need to do, but you then both bring your A game to your co-parenting relationship and to your children. And I think, in all honesty, unless you've got children together, there's no kind of benefit or leverage to want to do that. So that's why all the clients that I work with do have children together. That's not to say that if someone came to me and said, I'm really keen on working with you, I'd really love my ex-spouse, or the person I'm currently divorcing, to be part of this as well, but they're not interested, that I would turn them away. I do work one-to-one with people who can't get the other person to the table, but where you really see the benefit is where they're both willing to be part of the process.
Because essentially, where there are children, there is no clean break. It's you've got a shared future together, so you need to be around the table talking. And I guess if one party isn't interested in being coached, is that the kind of the narrative is to sort of say to them, to convince them by saying, well, look, do it for your children, because that will give them a more stable relationship and a better future. Is that how, do people have to be, if they have to be convinced, is that generally the kind of way that you bring them into the fold?
Yeah, absolutely. And they will receive it anyway, and actually it's those people who don't necessarily want to deal with the stuff that they need to deal with that you need it most. But if you can get them there, as I said, under the leverage of it's for your children, then it doesn't really matter how they come to the table, as long as they do and they partake, then the benefits always speak for themselves. And actually, I quite enjoy those sort of skeptics who are not quite so keen, and the results that you get at the end is really rewarding.
And what's the difference in emphasis between coaching and therapy, or people less familiar with these kind of processes? How do you kind of separate out those two?
Yeah, so therapy is very much looking at what you've been through and going over that and kind of analysing your feelings and your triggers and understanding, and I'm kind of unpacking your past and what's happened. With coaching, it's very different. We look at where you are now and where you want to be. So it's very much future focused. In coaching, I mentioned earlier the subconscious mind. When you relive an event and something that you've been through, your subconscious mind doesn't understand the difference between it actually happening and you remembering it. So you're just reliving that and kind of almost conditioning your body and your mind to feel all of those feelings and emotions again, which then sort of just enhances that habit. Coaching is all about trying to change those habits to get to the goal of where you want to be. So whether that is, I don't feel triggered by my ex, we can communicate really well. We have, our children are really happy and healthy and know that they're loved by both. And we're never going to be best friends. The marriage is over, but we both appreciate each other as parents. And that's it. Or if it's actually, and I want to go on and meet somebody else and have a really healthy relationship with somebody else and kind of rediscover who I am a little bit, then that's another goal. We would focus on that, not the previous relationship and the marriage and what's gone before, and instead we would be looking to really recondition almost your subconscious mind to focus on the future as opposed to looking over the past. Therapy tends to spend more time going over the past and understanding that and making sense of that. With coaching, it's reprogramming it, so we just overwrite it. The other thing with coaching and therapy is usually therapy is you meet for a session and then you don't have contact in between. It's just during your sessions, and a lot of the action and the analysis is you're guided, but you're kind of given that room to discover that yourself. With coaching, it's a bit more directive, so there will be exercises and things that you'll need to do in between. There'll be contact in between with your coach. It's very much kind of keeping you on track. So if you look at like a sports team, they would have training, but then in between they would be expected to look at their diet and their sleep and everything else that's going to impact that training and getting to that goal of winning that tennis match or whatever it is. That's kind of coaching. It's a lot more intense and a lot more involved, but it also tends to be more for a time box period. Therapy you can be in for quite a long time with no sort of end date until you're at a point where you feel you don't need it anymore. With coaching, it tends to be time boxed. So we're going to get to this goal and we're going to invest this time and this money and this effort and this energy till we get to that point.
Okay, well, thank you for talking to me today, Nichole, and we look forward to sharing this video with our members.
No problem. Thank you.